This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders who are designing our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and Len Jessup joins the show to talk about leadership, entrepreneurship, and creation across a career spent at the edge of change. He's a two-time university president, former business school dean, startup investor, and the author of Selfless and his latest book, Create More: Lessons Learned from a Life at the Edge of Entrepreneurship in 5 Acts. Len brings a grounded perspective on building, serving others, and knowing when leaders need vision, restraint, or forward motion. Len Jessup, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great, Joe. Thank you.
It's great to have you. And Len, so over the past year, I've spoken to a lot of first-time authors, but what I like to say is this is not your first rodeo when it comes to books. And so I want to start by bridging your two books together. So you wrote Selfless after learning to lead by putting others first, and Create More after a lifetime of building and pushing at the edge. What happened in your life that made you realize great leadership needed both of those things? So obviously a plug to get both books. I want people to get the second book too, but tell me about what happened to you that helped make those two so necessary.
Yeah, I think that it was a story that was brewing in my head, for decades, and I knew that I was eventually going to need to write about this. And then I finally got time to do it, after I don't know how many years go by. I credit that book, Selfless, really to my mom. That's a book about servant leadership, or selfless leadership, as I call it. And we got cute with the title, self being a verb, that you need to self less, kind of like wag more, bark less. And that all comes from my mom. My mom was the nicest person outside of my wife, Christy, the nicest person I think I've ever met. Would do anything for everyone, totally in service to others. And that was sort of the spirit and the motivation behind that book, and getting that message out that it's not only the right way to lead, but you can actually get teams a lot further faster by leading selflessly and engaging people. And then my dad was the entrepreneur. He was the one that kind of had the day job. He was we're all Italian family. My dad was a fireman in San Francisco, but he always had some business he was involved in on the side, constantly from one entrepreneurial venture to another. And my whole family was that way. Aunts and uncles and grandparents all had little businesses. So that was the entrepreneurial side, and that inspired me, and led to what I'm doing now with a venture capital fund, and kind of was the spirit, if you will, behind the book, Create More. Book 2.
Yep, there it is. And you write about being on the sort of the edge of entrepreneurship. Like you weren't all in, like maybe your dad might have been, but you were like on the edge, on the periphery. What moment pushed you closer to that edge now with this venture capital? Like, was there something that said like, man, it's my turn?
Because for decades, I had the safe day job and the steady income. Right. And so, but also was all along, I was a professor, a business school professor and a business school dean. So teaching entrepreneurship, teaching students about new technologies in business. I was doing it, startup investing. I helped start a little, venture capital fund, a little boutique fund in Seattle along the way. So I was always dabbling out on the outside and kind of out in the real world, so to speak, in entrepreneurial ventures and in venture investing. And so I kind of felt like I was living in both worlds. And this book, I think probably more than anything, is designed for that person kind of like me that's got that day job and that safety net, but has aspirations to kind of do something entrepreneurial. And they just need that little nudge to get them there.
Yeah, it's funny. You'll often hear artists talk about this, and the ones that succeed, and maybe they say because they succeed, but they say the way you become successful and become the best at what you do is if there's no plan B. And so that motivates them to do whatever it takes because there is no backup.
Yeah.
And a lot of entrepreneurs are like that. Like a lot of entrepreneurs are very much like no plan B. This is it. What do you
burn
think?
The boats, as they say.
Burn all the boats. What do you think it is about like folks that can relate to you, what you are doing in terms of, I have this steady day job where I'm safe, but also I could take sort of small risks with either, whether it's a small business, a side hustle, what have you. What's your argument to say that, you could succeed in that path without having to be balls to the walls, no plan B?
Right. I coach executives, quite often, and, because these are people are very successful executives, men and women in large, mature organizations, right? So that and so you hope that maybe one day they might feel that they can be an entrepreneur. They can be entrepreneurial within the organization.
Right.
And when I find executives who are stuck and having trouble and they kind of can't get through the morass that they're involved in, I often just ask a simple question and I just say, what if this was your company? And this was imagine that this is a startup and this is yours. And it's not just that you're running it beholden to somebody else, some other stakeholders or board. I mean, this is really yours. You're the backstop. This is it. What would you do in this circumstance? And then what I often get is, oh, well, if you put it that way, then I would do this and I'd fire that guy and I'd be pushing to those markets. And then I just say, all right, why aren't you doing that? What's stopping you now? And often, it helps them to discover that they've just got sort of these false barriers, they're excuses that they put in front of themselves. And there's a lot more to it than that, but that often is the beginning of that shift in mindset to get them thinking, okay, I can be taking some risks here. I can be doing some things a little bolder than what I've been doing to push this organization forward a lot faster, and have the velocity of an entrepreneur.
Nice. And speaking of that velocity, and selfless emphasizes slowing down to listen,
Yeah.
create more emphasizes momentum and action.
Yeah.
How do leaders know when to play both sides, when to pause, when to push? And I'm a brother from another mother with you. Like I believe in momentum. I feel like a lot of times momentum killers actually kill creativity, create growth because there's like this feeling of stagnation, like nothing is happening.
Yeah.
But then again, you can't always put, especially if you're the leader, you can't always be pushing momentum because maybe some of your team members are busy in the minutia of all things. So
Yeah.
tell me about that dance of pausing, but also pushing.
Yeah. I guess there's a couple of ways to look at it. That we talk about that theme a lot in Selfless, that go slow to go fast. If you're going to try to lead the organization through some major change, you got to have people engaged in that. You may have a false sense that, well, this is really going great. Have you talked to anybody yet? Not yet, but it feels good. This feeling really good. You probably, chances are, you've got passive aggressive behavior going on. You got to engage people and work them through, and have some buy-in to what you're going to do, or you're going to fail ultimately, and it's going to, stop what you're trying to do, and it's going to take longer than you think. And so, I mean, you could look at that and say, and I've had executives say, God, if I did that, it would just take forever if I got to talk to everybody. Uh, you know, but it ties into the notion that I write about in the book that entrepreneurs are also really good at experimentation, learning, and failing fast. And so in an entrepreneur, they might do it with customers and getting feedback from customers and, oh crap, this is not going to work. I thought this was what they were wanting. It's not. So I got to go back, I got to pivot, I go back and I experiment. And for the entrepreneur in a large organization, it's the same process. You're experimenting, you're learning, you're talking with people. You may be failing, right? I had something I wanted to implement organization wide. I thought this set of incentives would work. Thank God I talked to a few people and it's not going to work. I got to come back, pivot, go back out, experiment, talk to people. Nah, I got one more fine tune. The bonus needs to be structured this way. Boom, now I've got it. It's all perfect and I can implement. So I think that it's all one and the same thing. You got to be open, you got to be talking to people, you got to be learning and willing to pivot.
All right. So one more tie into the first book. So if a leader reads Selfless first, they might fear losing edge, right?
Yeah.
But if they read Create More first, they might fear becoming selfish.
Yeah.
So is there an order that people should read these books? Like, is it like a trilogy where you can't watch Empire Strikes Back before you watch, A New Hope? Is it something like that? Or tell me about that. Like, if someone were to be introduced to the work and what you're doing today, should they start with Selfless? Should they go Create More first? What do you think?
You could probably do them in any order, to be honest. But the good news about starting with Selfless, and I will say I've written these to be quick and engaging reads. It's uh, kind of in the mold of Mitch Albom, Tuesdays with Maury. This is, you could do this on a segment, on a flight, maybe two, and get through it pretty quickly. But the first one, I think, Selfless causes you to be more grounded and just to slow down for a second and think about my why. Why am I doing what I'm doing? And get back to core purposes, core values, and treating people well. Treating people with dignity and respect. And that's a good place to start from. Then when you start to think about, all right, now I got to get some stuff done. Whether it's I got an idea of something I want to launch, or I want to do something big in the organization I'm working for. I would start with the grounding and the why in selfless. And then this can be the blueprint to how to start acting a bit more entrepreneurially toward whatever it is that you want to accomplish.
Nice. And in Create More, you write about a subject that I'm very passionate about, and that is boredom. And I know it sounds weird for me to say that, but I feel like our boredom meters are almost like zero. Like
Yeah.
we literally cannot live with a second of bored. And it's funny. When my mother lives up north, and she'll come visit me, and we'll go out all day. You know, I'll take her to all the tourist spots in Charleston, and then at night we'll be sitting down watching TV, and she'll be yawning, and I'm like, "What's wrong, Mom?" She goes, "Oh, nothing. I'm just bored." I'm like, I literally spent like 8 hours today with you, taking you all over town. I'm exhausted. I'm broke. And now at 8 o'clock at night, you're yawning and you're bored. And
Yeah.
my mother is like an older woman, like she's in her 70s. She's not a
Right.
kid, but you're seeing it now with younger people where that boredom meter, man, if there's just I'm sure you see all the studies about social media posts. You got to grab the person within 3 seconds of their attention, all that stuff. The goldfish analogies people use about it. Tell me about how leaders should deal with boredom.
Yeah. You reminded me quickly of a quick anecdote with my mom toward the end of her life. And she got to stay with us for the last few years, and we took care of her. And about one of the only activities she could really do was to go. I'd have to get her into the car carefully, and we'd take her down to go grocery shopping. And we had our little market we would go to. And I kid you not, we would spend a good solid couple of hours, and she'd just hold on to the cart and go up and down every aisle and turn things and look at everything. And it drove me nuts. But I realized this was it for her, and this was the outing and the entertainment, what I wouldn't give right now to go back and spend a couple hours with her wandering around that market again. I'm sure you can relate. But for me, on the boredom, the real the boredom on the professional side of the life is that I I fortunately got to try out some jobs, and I went through undergrad, then an MBA and a PhD in business. So I had the world open for me, kind of any kind of business job I wanted to do. And I found that almost all of them bored me to death. I just couldn't stand it. Anytime anything was rote or memorization, routine, there was a redundancy and too much structure and, operating within certain swim lanes, guidelines. It just drove me nuts, to the point where I couldn't stand it. I mean, it didn't take long either, months or sometimes even days or weeks that it was like, okay, that boy, I'm glad I'm just doing this for the summertime because there's no way I could do this for the rest of my life. And that's what got me thinking, all right, I need something with more, I don't know, freshness, velocity, complexity, less structure. I end the book with I used to use this really deep personality measurement scale called the preference for procedural order. Think about that. What's your preference for procedural order? And it's a measure of to the extent to which you're kind of anally retentive, I guess, more than anything. And I would make this point with my undergraduate students by giving them that survey in class, and it just drove the point home that it's how much structure do you want in your job? You probably then business school student major in accounting, and now you need the opposite of that, the absence of structure and guidelines, and you like working without a net, then major in entrepreneurship or in marketing or something on that end of the spectrum in the business school. So fortunately, I figured that out quickly, and then I was able to use that in the classes with the students as well.
And what about leaders that get bored? Because a lot of times, they don't have a lot to do. Like
Yeah.
sometimes when you've built that team and you're delegating, there are times where you're like looking around like, should I be doing something right now? How do you help leaders deal with that? Because again, leaders have a lot going on in their lives, but there comes a point in time where they're not the ones actually doing everything.
Yeah. Remind me, there's a great old movie I used to watch with my kids, Nanny McPhee. And one of the classic lines in the movie was she was a nanny that would come in, and I think it was that when they need me, but they don't want me, that's when I really need to be here the most. And then when that flips and they really want me, but they don't need me, it's time for me to go. And that's at the heart of it, I think, for some leaders, that if you've got the organization so finely tuned and the team is right and it's firing on all cylinders and it's almost on autopilot, That's the moment for that leader in that mature organization where one of two things is going to have to happen. You either need to think of what's next for this company, and am I the right person to lead it there? Or if maybe there isn't a next, then it's what's next for me. Then this isn't the right place for me anymore. I need to go be stimulated and challenged again with some other mountain that I need to climb. At least for me, I mean, if you want your life to be meaningful, and and to get up in the day with the fire in the belly, thinking, God, I can't wait to go do whatever it is I'm going to do. If you're wired that way, then it might be time to move on to the next challenge.
Nice. And you mentioned earlier about the fact that you got a PhD. You kind of checked all of the boxes along the way, the educational. But you did that instead of like your traditional corporate path. Was there a fear in like, am I wasting more of my time with this PhD thing? Or, should I just go, blank or get off the pot kind of thing?
Yeah.
Like what kind of struggles were you dealing with when you finally decided to, I mean, obviously you're happy that you got the
Yeah.
PhD, I'm sure now,
It
but
all
like
worked out.
when you made that decision, was there trepidation?
Yeah, sure. I was getting advice from some people that, especially, going into the MBA, that boy, it might be good for you to work for a few years, then do the MBA. You might get more out of it. I was getting that
Right.
kind of advice, but I'm first generation college grad in my family. So, and my dad, again, fireman in San Francisco. So I had to work all the way through. I was always working while I was going to school, kind of burning the candle at both ends, throwing the candle into the fire. You know what I mean? Because I was working and going to school, and especially when I got up into the PhD program, to be working, a good 20 hours a week on campus. In that case, while doing the PhD was, boy, talk about burning the candle at both ends. But I had no choice, so I had to do that. I had to work to get through, to afford it. But then I was getting a world of experience while I was going to school, both out working outside the university and working some of the jobs on campus. So I felt like I was able to minimize that risk. Like, God, would I be able to apply this once I get the degree? Would I be able to do anything? Afterward, could I get a job? That never, really crossed my mind. And I had really good mentors all the way through that I trusted a lot. I respected and trusted, and that said, "Keep going. You need to keep burning. Keep going. Don't quit. Keep going. Stay on this journey that you're on. Keep going to school." And in particular, after the MBA, I had Bernie was my advisor in the MBA program, and he's the one that really helped me out thinking about the PhD program because I didn't even know what a PhD was or what you did with a PhD. And I credit him for counseling me into the PhD when I didn't even know what it was. But man, was he right. It was the right path for me. So I'm glad I did it the way I did it.
And like I said, it's not for everyone, but what advice do you give now to people up and coming who see that your entire wall is filled with certificates? Like, and for you, certainly it's worked out. But what would you give someone as a, hey, it worked for me, but for you, blank? Like, what would you say to maybe have someone pump the brakes when it comes to pursuing and checking all of those educational boxes?
Yeah, I've given that advice to hundreds, if not thousands, right? Going into considering an MBA, then considering the PhD, especially in business, but really in other domains as well. I walk them through. You could go this way. These would be the advantages. There'd be some disadvantages. You could go this way. Advantages, disadvantages. And then I encourage them to make that decision for themselves because it all depends on their context. And chances are, I don't, even if though it's a student I might have worked with for a few years, I don't really understand their life quite like they do, and that's really a decision for them to make. And I just try to help from my experience for them to judge one versus the other. I'm fond of the force field exercise. I have them, imagine the forces pulling me toward this. I've got forces sort of pulling me away or pulling me toward this. I'm going to imagine myself in those situations. I'm going to go get the MBA, up at Cal, or I got a chance to get a PhD at University of Arizona where I went, and I just say, if you can, go visit those places, go visit those buildings, and if not, do the best you can to imagine yourself in those two scenarios. And how does it make you feel? What are the forces doing inside you? And if I imagine myself in that Bolt Hall, and I'm going to do the JD at Cal, and I went and visited, and I just loved it, boy, then that's telling you something. But if you went and did the visit, and it was like, God, I don't think I could really, I don't think I would like living here or going into this building every day, then that's probably not the right step, next step.
And in terms of generations, we always like to poop on the generation behind us and younger. Out of curiosity, do you see little Len Jessups coming behind in, whether it's like maybe the younger millennials, the Gen Alpha, Gen Z? Like,
Yeah.
do people have the drive to do what you tried in being able to pursue all these degrees?
They're there. I think that's another one that's overblown a bit that, in the media with that the whole, kind of painting the whole generation with broad brush strokes. Because you think about, I've been on campuses for decades now, and I'm still very active in UNLV with the venture capital fund. And so I see students all the time now, Gen Zs kind of moving into the I generation, the totally digitally native. And they're still there. I mean, they're kids that are just, go driving through hard, totally motivated, really excited about what they're doing in their future, burning the candle at both ends. I've got 3 of them involved in the fund. We hired Christelle for Desert Forge Ventures is the venture capital fund here in Vegas. And she's a returning student, so she's in her early 30s, probably would make her kind of maybe tail end of the millennials.
Yeah.
Um, and she's that way. I mean, she's just incredible and so smart and so hardworking. And she's the backbone of this thing, of the fund. And I've got 2 current UNLV students who are kind of 21, 22, and they're our interns. And they're that way, man. They're just burning, cranking, grinding, to use the athletic analogy, and they love it. They love practice like a good athlete does. And I see a lot of myself in them. But also, now I'm going to turn 65 here in a few months, and I learned so much from them. I'm not only inspired by their energy, but I'm learning from them. We're looking at a venture that trains robots, to get the data to pump in as instructions into a large language model and an AI platform. And that's a domain I don't know all that well. These guys, man, the interns are all over it. I mean, they're into it. And so we learn from them on some of this stuff. It's awesome.
That's cool. One thing you write about in the book is about charisma and charismatic leaders. And I would love to get your take on this, because I think charisma is almost like a sense of humor, whereas some people think they have it but don't. Like Elon Musk, world's richest man, obviously more successful, probably the most successful entrepreneur that the world's ever seen, but he thinks he's charismatic. He's not. And it gets him into trouble. Like, I mean, he's admittedly said, like, the things he's done over the last couple of years have affected the bottom line of his companies. And obviously, none of us are perfect, but I want to get into this charisma piece, because I think we're all we all rally around the charismatic leader,
Right.
like, regardless if they have the skills or not, but they have that like glow and aura.
Yeah.
Unpack that a little bit for me in
Yeah.
terms of, like, do you have to have charisma? If
Yeah.
you don't, do you have to fake charisma? Get into this.
No, there's 2 important elements here I talk about in the book. One is that it's charisma that I'm talking about isn't so much about charismatic out loud. I'm peacocking and boy, I'm drawing attention to myself. And it's more about attraction, that there are things that you're doing that are attracting others. They want to follow you, they want to be around you, they want to listen to you. And that doesn't mean you have to be loud and have a big and bold personality. And I use some examples of ways that people do that. Elon's a good example that although he's not charismatic in the sense that he would be the life of the party here if we had a dinner party and everybody would be listening and every word and laughing at his jokes. And but it's the man or woman that you say, man, I'm going to work with that person because I'm going to learn from them. They're going to make me a better version of myself just by being with them. And there's attraction that way, that you're attracted in to be with them. There's a charismatic appeal that kind of goes beyond whether or not I can come up with a joke, at the spur of the moment and make you laugh. And then I also talk about, at the heart of that, psychologically, ethos and personality. And your ethos is that what drives me? What are the values that are important to me? What's my why? And then the persona, I put it into action, and then I'm actually living those values out loud. My wife talks a lot about this, is writing a book about this. I'm living my values out loud for real. And then that creates a perception of me, or a persona, and everything matches and there's authenticity. And that, I think, also is at the heart of the attraction, that people think, wow, that's a person I want to be with.
Hmm. How about the good for thee, not for me thinking? Sometimes you see this with leaders where they're like, hey, team, act like this, do this, but I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And I think you see that a lot of time with like either religious leaders, political leaders that
Yeah.
say, hey, you guys do this, but I'm not going to do that. And sometimes being the leader gives you the freedom to be
Yeah.
not good for me, not for me,
Yeah.
because you're the boss at the end of the day. How do you help leaders in terms of like sort of portraying their values, but also imbuing them and following them and being a leader by example?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, think about what I just said a moment ago. So that's a situation where there's not alignment. That person with the ethos, what really drives them isn't in alignment with what they say drives them or what they say their values are or what they say their why is. So there's a mismatch. And then they may not even understand their ethos, right? And they need to do some introspection to figure out why am I really doing this for reals? And then there's a mismatch between kind of what they're saying and the actions, and then the perceptions of them mismatch again. And there's an inauthenticity. They're not authentic, and people catch that right away. But we know it immediately. You start hearing somebody talk, or if you work with them and you watch them in a work setting, you quickly can sort out authentic from not authentic. And I think that's the big blind spot that many leaders have is, boy, they think that I can talk a good one and, you know what I mean? But I'm not the one here, first one in the morning, last one out at the end of the day. Okay, there's a mismatch there. Some leaders have a blind spot around that stuff, and people pick it up, and that's ultimately why I think people exit. There's a great piece in the org behavior literature, exit voice loyalty, that when people are unhappy in the organization, right, they're either going to be loyal, I'm going to stick it out because for whatever reason, I'm going to voice, like I'm going to say stuff because I don't like what's going on. I don't agree. You're not authentic. You're not doing what you're telling me to do, or they exit. And I think what's happening now, and I think especially after COVID, is more exit. People are just saying, forget it. This isn't worth it. I'm done. And I think especially the younger generation where, my generation felt like you got to kind of stick it out, and the younger generation, they'll bounce in a second if they see that authenticity. They won't hesitate to leave.
Well, also, it society dictates that too, right? Because again, going back to your generation, I think you're an older Gen
Yeah,
X or
I'm
or a young boomer.
yeah, no, I'm at the tail end of
Boomers.
the boomers. Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry. And then my wife is just a little bit younger than me, and she's kind of at that front end of the Gen X. So we
Okay.
kind of span those two.
So those generations, they sort of rewarded long standing, like, going to college, working that job for 20, 30 years, retiring, dying, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And when people were looking for jobs and hiring managers were looking at resumes, if they saw people like, oh, this person was at a company for 2 years, this person was at 1 year, that's something's off about them. Now job managers see that as, oh, okay, this person's selective. So it is in a way how society is shifting, not just in action in the job, but the way society looks at it. One of my running jokes, Len, I've always had is growing up as a Gen Xer. When you told someone that you were an entrepreneur, the other person would reply, "Oh, so you're unemployed."
Yeah.
Now you tell someone you're an entrepreneur, it's like, oh my God, you're like a celebrity. Like there's a glow about you.
Yeah.
So there's a way. It is funny how things change, and like the idea of you being mobile in your career is seen as a good thing, whereas it wasn't in the past. Same with entrepreneurship. Now it's really cool to be an entrepreneur. In the past, it was not.
Yeah, and I think it shifted too because there was a time. You think about the founding of this country and kind of you get through the Industrial Revolution, and entrepreneurs were few and far between at that point. There were a lot of little small businesses, but the big successful Fords and the Carnegies and those, they were few and far between. Now in the gig economy, anybody can be an entrepreneur. You don't even really necessarily need to have the computer science degree or the electrical engineering degree. And you could be quite successful now in the gig economy, whether you're a social media influencer or whatever you're going to do. It's just it's so much more opportunity. It's so much easier to do it now. And I think with these younger generations, I think that's why it all seems so much more attainable to them. And I think it is. I think it really is.
And you describe entrepreneurship as learnable, whereas I think probably the old school mentality was, oh, this is you're born. You're born with the
Yeah.
ability to be an entrepreneur. But what skill do you think takes the longest to develop in terms of entrepreneur, like actual skill set? You know,
Yeah.
let's say the entrepreneur is the subject matter expert on the thing that
Yeah.
it's a startup, whether it's a business, whether it's a widget, what have you. What entrepreneurial skill do you think is the toughest for that person to develop?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, so I think 9/10 of this we can teach because I've done it, teaching in business schools and entrepreneurship, popular topic. 9/10 of it we can teach. I can teach you all the tools. And I can teach you the mechanics of it and putting together a pitch deck and a business plan and have a convincing argument, thinking about your total addressable market. How quickly can you get to a minimum viable product?
Yeah.
What's your unique value proposition? It's all the tools and techniques, the mechanics of it. We can teach all of that. The one that's the hardest, that's kind of what I end the book with, is around risk and the tolerance for risk. And that I would get to the heart of that with students with that measurement scale, the preference for procedural order. And if you pegged out on that, I talk about in the book that I would do this exercise in this undergrad class that I taught every year on entrepreneurial leadership. I do the PPO. I'd have them line up from high preference for, I need structure, put your desks over here. And we go by the scores all the way down to the other corner of the room, the lowest scores. I don't need structure at all. In fact, I detest structure. And then I'd have them call out their majors, and it worked like clockwork every time. Accounting majors, like I mentioned, on that end, and the entrepreneurial
Right.
majors on that. And corporate finance was a little bit that way. Sort of digital finance a little bit further down. I wanted use computers to do derivatives and stuff, and they were pegged on that thing by majors, and it led to a great conversation about, so what is it that you want to do? What's the job that's attractive to you? You people on that end are going to be asking for money from the people on that end. So how do you have that conversation to get them to be, especially within organizations, to let the purse strings loose? Great conversations around that risk subject. Um, at the end of the day, even on risk tolerance, I felt that I could teach many people through that to be comfortable with taking a calculated risk. Many I could get there from the business school students, but there was always a set at that far end that there was just no way. No matter what I did, walking through Tversky and Kahneman and game theory and all kinds of stuff, and I couldn't get them there. And that's okay. That's just the way that they're wired. That for them, it was just a bridge too far to think, wait a minute, what? I gotta, I just got a business degree. I can go make close to 100 grand, depending on what their major was. So, wait a minute, I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to buy a house. I'm going to continue to live like a student on nothing. And then I'm going to go borrow money from people that I'm going to put at risk in this venture, and everything goes haywire, and I'm going to have to go bankrupt. And that's just no way. There's no way I'm doing that. And so there's always that handful of students on that one dimension that you just can't get there. And that my experience in those proportions probably describes the population at large. And to your question, I mean, that's the one that's the hardest. If you don't have that, it's difficult to get it.
No, that's great. And so, Len, I always wrap up these conversations taking folks behind the dedication of the book, and you kind of alluded to him earlier, but you dedicate the book to Roger Gerard,
Yeah.
a mentor, partner, friend, and model of fearless, selfless entrepreneurial leadership whose steady hand, sharp eye, and generous heart have guided so many ventures, including mine. Why was it important to dedicate the book to Roger?
Yeah, Roger was very important to me as a mentor. And I continue to have mentors to this day and people who guide me. That's another thing I think that helps people to be, even when they're seemingly successful in later stages in their life. Roger and he passed away during the writing of this book, and he and I have known each other, gosh, for almost 20 years. He's the one that I worked with to create the little boutique venture capital fund in Seattle. I credit a lot of the success of that venture to him. and his encouragement in me, of continuing to stoke my entrepreneurial fires while I was working through day jobs, running a business school and running a university and, those kinds of things. He said, not, don't forget that entrepreneurial edge. It's there and it's in you. And then when I got to the point where I was wanted to wrap up the higher ed administrative career, he and my wife were probably the two chief proponents of me wrapping it up and starting the venture capital fund. I think both Roger and my wife, Christy, knew that that's really where I needed to be, and what was next for me. So that was credit to him for that. Meant a lot to me, and great guy.
Awesome. And you can read all about it and create more lessons learned from a life at the edge of entrepreneurship in 5 acts. Len Jessup, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. That was a lot of fun.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Len and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.